Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mr. Saucedo's YouTube videos. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about vaccines, about bacteriophages, and a little bit more about viruses and infections. So let's start with bacteriophages. So what are bacteriophages, first of all? Bacteriophages are viruses that only infect bacteria. Phage means eat, bacteria means bacteria. So it's literally a bacteria eater. They are the most common type of virus on Earth, and they only infect bacteria, right? So here's what they look like. They kind of look like little alien spaceships. This is the capsid. This is the DNA on the inside. This is called the tail. This little needle-like thing is called the core. And then these little legs are called the long tail fibers. And so we've seen bacteriophages before when we were looking at DNA, when we were talking about where the discovery of DNA, the Hershey Cook experiment, that utilized bacteriophages. They were just using radioactive isotopes to see specifically what was being injected, if it was protein, if it was RNA, or if it was DNA. Okay, so sorry, I had to talk a little bit about that. So, how do bacteriophages work? Well, the long tail fibers attach to the surface of a bacterium. So, this is like the E. coli bacterium. And so it will land with its little long tail fibers. The tail will spin like a drill, pushing the core into the cell wall. When it does that, the DNA automatically gets injected. And what it does is, right, the DNA contains the instructions to manufacture more of itself. And so before you know it, the bacterium will cease doing normal functions and will start building more bacteriophages. And then before you know it, the bacteriophages will fill the inside of the bacterium until the cell wall ruptures, and then bacteriophage spread to other bacteria in the colony. And so this is kind of what it looks like. I thought it was kind of a cool animation. So you can see the bacteriophage and it's landing onto the bacterium. When it does that, the core is going through the cell wall, and then it goes straight through the tail, through the core. That is the DNA, and now it is mixing with the genetic material inside of the bacterium. And so we'll start manufacturing more bacteriophages. So there are different types of viral infections, though, and there are two key patterns there, right? So we have lytic and lysogenic infections. So lytic infections are what I just described to you. Lytic infections are infections where the host cell burst, releasing more viral offspring into the host's system. These are extremely common types of infections like cold and flu. So you can kind of think of them, they're not bacteriophages though, but you can kind of think of them as, okay, they enter, they, say, hey, make more of me. They do, the cell will explode or rupture. And when it does that, it spreads to more cells in your body. And so the common cold and the flu are great examples of lytic infections. And again, that gives us half of this cycle. Lysogenic infections, on the other hand, are where that actually changes your DNA. So their DNA gets injected inside, and it becomes a permanent part of of the host's cell. And so every time this cell divides, now it has that little added piece of DNA there that wasn't there previously. And so examples of lysogenic infections are things like chickenpox and herpes, which are permanent things. Like they stay with you and they can become lytic randomly. So lysogenic infections are a little bit more dangerous because you can have it, not even know you have it. And then just suddenly they can become lytic. So that little piece of DNA there has the instructions, hey, build more of me and destroy the cell. But it's like a time bomb. It just waits. And a lot of times we don't know what causes them to flare up. Like herpes, for example. If we're talking about like herpes simplex type 1, that cause cold sores, right? Those little bumps that you get on your lips. If you've ever had, cold sore before in your life, you have herpes simplex type 1, and it is a permanent part of your lip cells. Your lip cells are, they have this little extra piece of DNA that this virus injected at some point, and they can flare up, and we don't know what causes them to flare up. They used to think it was temperature related, which is why we call them cold sores. Now we know that isn't the case. Generally, when it's colder, your immune system is a little bit suppressed anyway, a little bit worse, and so that could be a reason why. But we now know it's not temperature. How does your body defend against viruses? Well, skin is the first line of defense. It is a large protective barrier that literally physically prevents viruses from entering your body. It is the first line of defense. We have antibodies. They are small proteins in the blood that bind to pathogens and mark them so that white blood cells can destroy them. And so we like to utilize these little kind of Y shapes to represent antibodies. And then obviously the immune system contains your white blood cells, and they send they basically send in the cavalry, right? The white blood cells are the cavalry here. The immune system is sending them in, and they will destroy, whatever cell has been infected. Once, how do you stop, how do you stop a lytic infection then? Normally, the white blood cells will consume the cells before they explode and before they can spread the infection to another set of cells. And so that's generally how that works. Now, how do vaccines work then, right? We're talking, obviously, vaccines have been a huge deal recently. Generally speaking, vaccines are preparations of either weakened or inactive pathogens used to produce an inherent immune response. So generally, they are weakened or inherent or inactive pathogens. Weakened meaning they can't really infect you. Inactive meaning that it's sometimes only a part of them. In the case of the COVID vaccine, it's kind of cool because it doesn't contain any of that. It just contains RNA that says, "Hey, make this little piece of protein," and it just so happens that that protein is on the outside of the COVID virus. So when your body is manufacturing that protein, your white blood cells, antibodies are marking them, and they're saying, "Hey, that's not supposed to be here," and then your body figures out how to fight off when it sees that particular protein again, which would be when you have been exposed to COVID. So it's kind of cool. And so literally your body learns how to make antibodies against it. The first time you normally get sick, and I'm talking about when you don't have a vaccine, but usually when you get sick, your body has never seen this type of thing before. So it has to mark it, and it has to learn to manufacture antibodies to fight and to mark them for destruction in the future. And so it will remember how to fight it later on. That's kind of the idea behind how immunity works. And so Edward Jenner in 1796 made the first vaccine against smallpox. And so I'll say a little bit about that because it's kind of cool. Cowpox was a thing before. And what he noticed were that dairy workers or people that worked around cows tended not to get smallpox. And so he said, well, what if I take a little piece, how can I use this information to figure out how to stop smallpox, which was a horrible, horrifying disease. And so he was thinking maybe the dairy workers have some sort of immunity because they've been exposed to cowpox, which the normal population wouldn't, that I can use. Maybe there's something in their blood that we'd be able to use. All right. And so if you have any questions, please let me know.